everybody, and welcome to the strategy edition of the Rec Poker Podcast. I am your host, Rob Gardner. We are brought to you by the official sponsor of the Rec Poker Podcast, the Running Aces Casino Horse Track, and of course, Poker Room, official home of the Rec Poker Weekend, which the next edition of that is going to be coming up here in January. So you're going to stay tuned for news on that. You can check them out at runningaces.com. They just revamped fairly recently the entire casino there. They've upgraded the sports book area, the food area, lots of cool stuff there. But by far the coolest thing about the Running Aces casino is that the hotel is literally right next to the poker room. So if you're lucky enough to get one of those, I blame the producer. He is very lazy and irresponsible. I know. That's me, by the way. In case you didn't know, I'm producing and hosting. So anyways, what I was saying is what's really cool about Running Aces is the hotel's right next to the poker room. So if you're lucky enough to get one of those first floor rooms, you're literally a 30, 40-yard jog from the poker table to your room, which is cool in and of itself, but it's especially cool with some of the mini tournaments they have there in the tournament series when you can just literally go to your room on break instead of having to fight for the huge line at the urinal. So definitely check that out. It's a really cool room, and I believe we'll have official details on Rec Poker Weekend here in the next couple of weeks. So bug Jim about that, and we'll find out when we can all get out there. But tonight, we are joined by some very special guests. I have Chris Jones, Taylor Maas, and of course, the faithful Ben Enslow repping the GG hoodie tonight. And gents, well, first, I guess I should say thanks to Chris and Taylor for their huge sacrifice tonight, joining us on the strategy pod when there's a Packers game on national television. Like I'm thoroughly impressed. I mean, you can see Chris has got his Packers colors underneath the hoodie there, repping the green and gold. Guys, thank you for being here during this intense time.
Yeah, let's just move on from this. I don't need to entertain this nonsense out of you. I've been looking in the rule book. Yeah, I think there's a rule in the NFL where both teams could lose, and I was trying to figure out what that would be for the game tonight.
So you're not even anti-sweating the Packers. There's no like rooting for the Eagles here, just so Minnesota can kind of move up in the standings at all.
Hey, like I said, I'm trying to find a way for both teams to lose. I think that would be ideal for me.
Fair enough. I mean, maybe it's like maybe the NFL is like ICM, or when you're in last place, you're kind of in first place because you have the least amount of pressure on you, and like winning is worth more. So maybe the Vikings are working that way up. Enough of the NFL talk. We'll get into some strategy talk here today. Today's strategy edition, we're going to talk about bluffing in the real world. And the reason I wanted to talk about this topic is I feel like most people that I meet in poker are in one of two camps. They absolutely love bluffing and do a ton of it, or they absolutely hate bluffing and they're terrified of it. And bluffing's been around for a long time. I think there were even amazing stories from the Wild Wild West where you could actually get shot for bluffing in games many, many, many years ago. And then fast forward to, the late 2000s, early 2000 teens, when poker really took off on television and internet poker started to explode. We started to see more and more bluffing as people got better at the game faster. And then we got to see these really cool high stakes games where people were playing for hundreds of thousands of dollars. And we would see these ridiculously sick bluffs where there'd be, $300,000 in the pot and somebody would go all in with complete air and win a huge pot and everybody be talking about it. And it's kind of given bluffing this luxurious, glorious view that may not be accurate or realistic for the type of poker and the games we play. Now, if we just kind of look at bluffing from a theory perspective, the reason bluffing is a thing is this concept of polarized ranges, where if you're facing somebody and they put a lot of chips in the pot and their range consists of really, really, really strong hands and bluffs, it's really hard to play against, because when you have an average hand, well, you really want to call to beat all of those bluffs, but you also know they have a bunch of monsters and you don't want to dump your stack into those really strong hands. And so it makes it very difficult to decide what you want to do unless you have a really, really premium hand. And that just makes it a very hard style to play against. But when we're playing low stakes online, low mid stakes live, those games play very, very different than the TV games we've seen. And they play very different from even like high stakes tournaments like Triton. And so how we approach bluffing is very different. And so I was really wanting to take tonight and talk with these three intelligent aficionados of poker and kind of get their take on how they approach bluffing in the games that they're actually playing and in games that many of you listening are actually playing. So we're going to break this down and look in 3 areas. And the first area I want to talk about is the types of boards and board runouts where we're actually targeting bluffing. Because I think there are some very common runouts that people like to chase that I don't think are very good. And I think there's some sneaky boards and board runouts that I think are actually really cool and fun to bluff at and still very profitable even in low stakes games. So I'm going to start with Taylor Maas over there with the Jefferson jersey in the background. Talk to us about kind of your bluffing strategy when it comes to boards, board textures, board runouts. How are you deciding when you're in a good situation?
Yeah, so I think the first thing as it relates to like board textures that I think of is just like how much does this either the flop or the most recent card kind of change the dynamics of what we've built up in this hand? Like, I think everyone can kind of agree, like someone raises pre-flop, someone calls, and it's kind of in the favor of whoever raises. And the same can be true on the flop. Whoever continuation bets is generally, kind of ahead and the other person potentially behind. But there's boards that when the turn comes, it kind of flips that and can really change who might be ahead in the hand. And it's like, how dynamic was this turn card or how dynamic was this river card? Because if it does change that, then the strong hands that our opponents had before have now shrunk down. And some of our middling hands in our range likely have elevated to be much stronger. So I look for those types of situations. A common one would be something like Jack 6-4 is the flop, and then the turn is a 7, or the turn is a 5, or the turn is a 3, or even a queen or a king can really be ones that like change the dynamics of the hand. So I look for things like that. There's certain cards that don't really change that, depending on the position of the original raiser. Like it could be if it's a totally different board, if it's 10, 9, 4, and then the turn's an ace after someone checked. Well, that's a totally different scenario. So in my mind, you really have to think about like how dynamic is this and what does it change for what type of range our opponent has in this specific spot.
I like that. And I should have asked this earlier. Taylor, like just tell everybody kind of the types of games and buy-ins you play online and live, just to give people an idea.
I pretty much am an exclusive tournament player. I almost never play cash. I only play tournaments. I play a few mixed games. On the online stakes, I play all the high stakes on global, essentially. And then live, I'll play whatever the local buy-ins are with a max of like 1K for buy-ins.
Okay. Ben Enslow, why don't you tell us what you play as well and then kind of how you approach boards and runouts?
Sure. Yeah, this is great. I love this conversation. When you were talking about the history of poker, little side note, I was thinking about like the old 4 and 5 and 6 bets that you used to see, like where people were just clicking each other back in those old, like, I think they're like EPT broadcasts and stuff like that. Anyways, I love those old clips, so I just thought of that. But for me, I'm playing as the lowest of low stakes online, and occasionally when I get a chance I'll play some smaller live tournaments or some small cash games, but I'm mostly focused on tournaments online. So for me, like, I just try and think about the story that I'm trying to tell throughout the hand, kind of similar to what Taylor's saying about the dynamics of things and how they're going to change throughout different runouts. And thinking about like what my opponent's gonna what my opponent thinks of what my hands are gonna look like, more so than what I actually just have in my hand. I'm thinking, okay, what is this person thinking of me? Like, do they think I just have it here and they're just gonna fold, or are they just gonna stick around with any pair? But that's more of like the specifics of the opponents, but which I think we're gonna get into a little bit later. But that's kind of where where I lean to, especially in these really small games. I usually play like $5 to $25 buy-ins online, and then like $100 buy-in live tournaments when I get the opportunity. So they're hard to come by lately, unfortunately. So.
Very, very cool. Chris, I'm curious. I know you've been working with some big name coaches. I'll leave it to you and defer whether you want to name said big name coaches, but you've been working with some big names and seeing some really cool results from that. So kind of curious you're taking all this and how you're approaching this aspect of bluffing.
Oh, yeah, I don't know. I'm working mostly, I've worked with Matt Affleck, who's actually a wrecking crew ambassador. I forget what coach, whatever his title is, but it's been fantastic. For me, I think bluffing is something, I agree with Taylor. I think like we want to look for moments where the dynamic of the story that either our opponent is trying to tell or that we've sort of told along the way really opens up an opportunity for us to shift that narrative pretty strongly. And I think those are really good bluffing opportunities. I think the other times that I look to bluff, especially at lower stakes, they're a kind of opponent dependent, I think. And it's really about those moments where the board gets really terrifying. That I think where a lot of people, even if it's unlikely that you'll ever have it, if you have an opponent who's not maybe paying attention as well, or just going to see all the monsters, then I like to show them as many monsters as I can. So that's a really like a 4 flush or a 4 straight board. When it's very unlikely maybe that I get there like that or with a really good holding, but you can just tell sometimes that somebody has like just really hates that card, and that's another good time to pull the trigger, I think.
I like that as well. I had one bad one situation I don't like and two I like, and I'll open it up to anybody that wants to chime in on this because I'm curious your thoughts. The area I don't like that I see most common is somebody will flop a flush draw, they'll bet 2 streets, brick the flush draw, and then bomb the river. And the biggest reason I don't like this, one, it's the most common bluff line, so even like recreational players tend to look for it. But two, you're kind of hoping your opponent has a busted flush. You're trying to get them to fold draws, and you're holding 2 of the cards your opponent needs. So I think that's a very common overbluffed line that I don't like. The 2 areas I really like that I think are underbluffed. One is runner paired board cards. So, the board's 10-6-3 and it goes like turn queen river queen or turn 5 river 5. I think that people, just because of biases and stuff, organically assume when it goes runner like that people got there. And it just tends to generally not be a card that's in their hand, because usually when they've called flop, they have something. And so unless it's like a card that filled in a draw or something, it tends to be less hit. And so I think it's kind of a sneaky situation that I've had a lot of success with. The other situation that I've had a lot of success with is, crap, it just skipped my mind. I literally had notes on this in my head. Now it just jumped my mind. This is what happens when you drive 8 hours in the snow today.
Pen and paper is really cheap.
Oh,
I mean, like if you just like get one, like write down your thoughts beforehand, like they don't go away.
I can't believe this is evading me right now. Well, here, you guys comment on those 2 spots. It'll come to me here in a second.
Yeah, no, I think that's very true. I mean, I didn't really talk about like bad spots to bluff, and I would say bad spots to bluff are ones like, just because your opponent shows weakness does not mean you should necessarily be bluffing.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of times people are trapping. A lot of people bet small and are just trying to kind of like sucker you into a pot. So a lot of people think of bluffing as like, okay, well, let's go see the flop. And if it goes check, then I should just stab turn and take a shot here just because my opponent checked flop. That's not always the case. There's a lot of people that overbet, so then when they check, it really weakens their range. But there's a lot of other people that are really good at understanding check back range and trying to give you rope. Like it could come ace, king, whatever on the flop and they check back. And they could do that with ace, king because they know they have the board locked down and they're just trying to get you to like put some chips in the middle. And like you're falling right into their trap. So I would say don't just bluff because your opponent kind of showed a sign of weakness. That generally is an all right sign, but I wouldn't take it every single time. You got to be very aware of the situation.
Yeah, I think I put in a few like double barrels before where it's like I know in my head I don't want to give up, but just knowing my opponent, I've just been like, okay, I think they're leading me down this brick road of setting me up to try and put more chips in on the river, and I don't have to. So I think knowing when to dial it back and knowing when to shut it down is also like a skill too. And sometimes we'll just show like something you could have got to fold, and then going forward, right? So I think that's what I kind of think about sometimes too. So good points there for sure.
The other big one that I think that I see a lot of people maybe not pay attention to, and maybe they're on their phone, or this is why it's so important to pay attention at the table. But there are tons of players, I think, in our local field or in sort of smaller stakes tournaments who will like never believe anyone, right? And they'll call down with like fourth pair or fifth pair, and maybe they win a pot that way, or maybe they lose a pot and you see them call down with fourth or fifth pair. But like that's somebody who you, unless it makes sense. I mean, it might make sense sometimes, but sometimes you can that didn't make sense, right? And that's a player that you want to start to at least say, do not bluff without a very good reason to bluff. Like this is a player who likes to call down, likes that feeling of turning over fourth pair and winning. And so if you can't beat fourth pair, you better have a board dynamic or a story that really is compelling, or a bet size, something that changes that for that player, that makes them uncomfortable about taking that action because they've already shown you they're willing to do it. And I see so many people, well, that guy just showed that down. Why do you think you were, and it just happens a lot.
Yeah, I think that's very, very true. I remembered, of course, 2 seconds after Taylor started talking, it came to me. The runouts that I think are also really good are backdoor draws. And one of the reasons that backdoor draws are good, especially against weaker players, is if we were to take a standard flop, we'll call it Jack 8-4 rainbow, right? And we were throwing the solver, and we make a standard C bet, and we look at our opponent's calling range. They're going to have a lot of backdoor draws in those calling ranges, especially hands that are like backdoor suits that have backdoor flush draws that have at least one over to the board. Because when they pick up that backdoor draw, they pick up equity. And the average casual recreational player isn't aware of that. So they don't make those types of floats as high. So when you're playing somebody that doesn't make those kind of floats, and then you get that kind of turn heart, river heart that puts 3 hearts on the board, it makes it an incredibly great board to bluff because 1, your opponent's less likely to have it because they're not floating properly. But 2, again, it's just a great board to rep. And that can give you some situations where like maybe you flop a straight draw and you're like, okay, well, I kind of want to barrel this off, but I don't want this to look like a busted straight draw. But if it goes runner hearts or runner spades or runner clubs, and you get that kind of backdoor suit run out, it's a great spot where you can take your straight draw and now turn it into a pure bluff and not have this issue of like, oh, it's really obvious my straight draw didn't get there. Cool. All right. So let's go to the second area here I want to talk about, which is situations. And since we're all tournament players, we won't delve too far into the cash game world and try and get too far out of our lane here. So let's just focus on tournaments and talk about stages of the tournaments and specific tournament situations where you guys might be more or less likely to implement bluffs. And I'll go in reverse order here. We'll start with you, Chris.
So stage of the tournaments when I'm more likely to implement bluffs. I think it's very likely going to be in the higher, little bit higher leverage, but not like super ICM heavy spots. Like, I don't think I want to run a massive bluff without a really compelling reason at a final table or like at a final table bubble or something like that. But I do think it's maybe effective in that, like, getting down toward the bubble but not on the bubble kind of like phase where you're like winnowing down and people are maybe slowing down too early or kind of being bubble sort of a little too early, like, you know, you're and those feel like really good spots to come up with a you know, kind of a bluffing range. I think that the time that it's least effective is the very beginning of the tournament. I feel like that is a time where people are willing to, they feel like they have so many chips that people are very willing to pay off and just, you know, whatever, it's just whatever. And so those feel like really awkward times to do a big bluff.
I love that. I was going to ask this later, but I'll ask it now since you brought it up. Do you feel like there is a level in the tournament where that switches? Do you ever feel like there's kind of like a certain big blind level where that feels like it just flips?
I never thought about the exact level, but I think it's like where when like the starting stack starts to be in that 30 to 40 big blind range, that's where it feels like
that's exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say too. I was like, it all depends on the stack depth, I think, where it really changes because people start realizing that they're starting to get short and they're running out of time and the blinds are going to continue to go up. So it's like that realization moment, I think, where it's like the little bit of fear starts to creep in.
I've always felt like big blind 800 or 1K, which is about.
I was going to say 1K.
Yeah. It kind of feels like that spot.
Yeah, for live, that's a good one.
Yeah, and it's funny because you will see people try to bluff like level 2, level 3 to Chris's point, and how did you call me down all the way with that? You know, like they're just like, they don't realize that the guy that they're playing against has 12 bullets in his pocket and like he just doesn't care. And I don't remember, I feel like it was on one of these pods. Chris, maybe you'll remember. I feel like somebody brought this up. So this isn't mine. I can't take credit for this. But somebody talked about it. It might even have been you, Chris. Like, there's a bit of a free roll, right? Because when you bluff catch somebody and you're wrong, you just muck your hand. But when you're right, you get to show it and have like all the praise in the world. So there's for some people, like there's an incentive to it that I think plays a role too.
In terms of that like breaking point, I would say it's the point, at least in like local tournaments and stuff like that, when pots stop going multi-way all the time.
That's like really a good point as
well. That's
another
good point. Yeah.
It's like those things happen at the same time. You start to notice people aren't so speculative pre-flop. They're also starting to feel that pressure with like bigger bet sizes. I feel like it's the 1K level somewhere around there, but it's you can notice it. Like you go to early stages and 3 ways, 4 ways, 5 ways, and then all of a sudden, at some point, it's heads up, heads up, heads up. Oh, 3 ways, heads up. And it's like, that's the point. Like, stop and think. And like, that's the point where this like trigger has switched.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I even think I think the same thing online too. Like, I don't think it changes much online. I think when you start seeing some people raise and the blinds just fold and someone take a pot down without seeing a flop, I think that's a usually pretty good sign that the tables are turning. And I really like where Chris is at, where with the bubble, like I don't want to be right on the bubble when I want to start trying to build, but I want to be like back from the bubble so that I can build. And then when I get to the bubble, I can just kind of be patient, get through the bubble, and then build again to try and get to, you know, that final table or deep run. So, yeah.
I like that as well. What about situationally? I'm curious for all of you, how you feel about pot size, like bluffing for big pots versus bluffing for small pots, and then positionally, like if you factor your position into any of it. We'll start with you, Chris.
I think so. One of the things I'm trying to get better at is trying to win or bluff at like really, really tiny pots, or like there are pots where I think I've historically just been like, you know, I just miss and it's like it's hopeless and I've given up on the flop, and then it goes check, 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 And it's like suddenly I'm like, maybe and like that's where I'm trying to get a little bit better. So when you talk about pot size, I think those really tiny pots still matter, especially if it goes like multi-way. Like there's something significant there. So those are pots I'm maybe trying to win more, but I would say most of the time, I mean, I guess bluffs come in all shapes, right? Like there's the bluff where it's a one and done. I'm going to check raise this and I'm just going to one and done this. And if I get called, I'm out, or, I need better equity to keep going. But, yeah, I guess I don't have an answer about like specifically what kind of pot size I'm looking for, but I do recognize that most of my bluffs come either early in a hand or late in a hand. And when they come late in a hand, they're usually big pots. And I'm trying to get better at winning small pots late in a hand with some bluffs.
I like that.
Yeah.
What about you, Taylor?
I almost never think about the pot size, although it does come into play in terms of like how sticky I think my opponent might be. I think it's definitely just more scary to bluff at the big pots. It's been 3-bet. There's a lot of chips in the middle, and then the bet size that you're having to go after is all in or close to all in, or like a huge portion of your stack, and like those are tough, and like you got to have good reasons why you think your opponent might fold when you're in these spots, because those are tournament defining hands. Like if you think about it, like as you like tournament recap, it's like your tournament is likely determined by just a few hands that you play, and when you take a bluff line like that, you're essentially really like narrowing it down to this specific hand that says like, I am willing to stake my entire tournament on me getting my opponent to fold in this spot, which can be tough. It's a really, really tough spot to pull that trigger. But I do love bluffing in small pots. Like, I think those are the easy way for you to like slowly chip up, because people feel less inclined to like need to defend those specific spots. The classic example of this is just like, a check raise from the big blind. Like someone opened, you called the big blind, you check, they continuation bet, and then you go for the check raise. Like that is the standard like small pot bluff spot for you to take. And those can be super helpful. Even though your tournament is likely defined by a few hands, there's these types of spots in small pots where if you can find those right bluffs, it'll just keep adding to your chip stack and giving you more cushion, that if one of those tournament defining hands is a cooler going against you, you can still stay alive and come back to fight. So I love bluffing and going after spots in small pots, because I know that's my key to my tournament success.
What about you, Ben Enslow?
I think I'm on the Taylor train on this one. I hate to say it, but sometimes you got to agree with Taylor, I guess, every once in a while. But yeah, I know Chris is shaking his head. No, I like this. I like the small pots. Like I was saying earlier, I find like with the small stakes that I play, once I get 2 barrels in, or even get called by the check raise, and then more chips go in, the ranges get really, really start narrowing down with these players that are in these like $5 buy-ins. So I tend to go after the smaller pots a little bit more and avoid those bigger situations, and then just tend to go more for value in those larger pots. But yeah, I really like those small pots, especially at those levels that Chris was talking about, like before the bubble, building up to, not right on the bubble, but building up to it, and those portions of the tournament that we mentioned earlier.
Yeah, I think we're all in lockstep about this. Go ahead, Tyler.
Yeah, I didn't even get to answer the first part to give in, but like Chris said, he doesn't like running bluffs at the final table. I love like bluffs in small pots to try and like chip up in small ones. I hate running big bluffs, multi-street big bluffs at a final table. Like that can be really tough. People are generally really tight at the final table, want hands. And in my mind, that means it's great for you to take single stab bluffs at pots and try to go after them. Like people generally have a comfort level, and we were talking about it with hey, what's the blind level that bluffs start to get through, or, people stop playing multi-way. And it's like this comfort level that people have that are like, hey, I don't want to give up these 1K chips or these 5K chips that I have. And it's like, once that triggers, like, you can start to bluff your opponents more. And that's very true at the final table when you have, 25K chips or 100K chips. And it's just a huge spot. And it's just all of a sudden, like, they continuation bet because they should. And then you put in a small check raise. Mm-hmm. And it's like, they're sitting there. They're like, this is it. Like, do I really want to go to war with ace high here on this board? And their answer is probably no. And you could just take the pot down and you scoop those chips and you bought yourself another like 2 or 3 orbits from having to do anything. And you wait for other hands to try and go crazy with. And it's like those bluffs at a final table, trying to win those small pots is a recipe for success.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I think that the TV crowd, we've seen the glory and the glamour of these huge triple barrel bluffs. But in reality, tournament life matters, and we can win so many more chips at such a smaller risk if we can just win the pots that nobody wants. And so I love looking for spots where my opponents get incredibly capped. One of my favorite spots to bluff are spots where my opponent checks twice and then just blasting rivers, for pot, because I just know that like they're never going to be able to hit the MDF. If you guys know what MDF is, minimum defense frequency, like when they check twice and I just go pot on the river, like they have to call like 50% of the time, and they're just never ever getting there. And that just means I have a very profitable river bluff. And so anytime we can find these spots where people are just really interested in the pot, those are pots that are easier to win at lower risk. They also just keep you off people's radars more, right? Like you're only going to get so many triple barrel bluffs through before like the whole table is starting to give you the stink eye, and the guy with ego at the table is just ready to call you down just to make a point. But when you win the pots nobody cares about, or you check raise small on a flop because your opponent's c-betting 100% of the time, people don't really think about that as like, oh man, this guy's running the table over. Like they're not even, like, half the time people aren't even paying attention to the pot when they're not in it because it's so small. So you kind of fly under the radar. And I think that is a big part of being a successful bluffer, is you don't want the reputation of being a bluffer. You don't want to get that image because you just want to kind of keep slowly stealing the cheddar from the mousetrap without anybody realizing. So really, really strong points there. And if you're one of those people I mentioned in the beginning who is uncomfortable bluffing, then maybe listen to this section back and maybe try to start implementing bluffs in really small pots and spaces, because that's how you can kind of get comfortable with it without feeling like you have to do this like all in for your tournament life with 6 high in order to get the bluff experience or to get the effect of it, because you really can make a lot of money with those small bets.
And it is really important to kind of talk about that a little bit too, because the hands you choose to pick as bluffs are really important too. And you kind of hit on one of the points right away in terms of like having a polar range. Part of having a polar range is like you're not just linearly betting hands and you're choosing some of those bottom ones, but not necessarily like the bottom. It's like the types of hands that can still like find a way to catch up and get lucky. And like you see some spots of these, professional players, some highlight reels where they go runner. They have this backdoor straight or backdoor flush, and then they hit it. And it's because they're like, hey, this is an opportunity for me to bluff on the flop. I'm going to take it. I want to try and win a small pot, but it's not always going to work. So when they call, you want to have at least some sort of backup outs for you to be able to like catch up and be able to win the hand, just as an escape out for you in there. So pick the right hands. It's not just like start blindly bluffing, because then you're just going to be bluffing too much and everyone's just going to go, okay, well, I'm going to call down versus this person, and this is going to be easy for me to play.
Yeah, I think I've said that on stream before, where I've said like I try not to run any like zero equity bluffs, especially on flops, where it's like as long as I, and you're usually going to have some kind of a backdoor, but there are times where it's like, okay, we're not going to try and do something where we have absolutely nothing going for us. So
yeah,
the types of hands that are great are ones that you go, hey, I've got some equity in this hand. I'd really, like some of these next few cards could be helpful for me. But if I raise and they raise again, I have an easy fold because I know I shouldn't be in there. Those are like the types of hands that are good. If you're in a spot where you're like, hey, if they raise, I still might want to call because I think I still have good equity, might actually be better to just call with those hands and not take that hand as a potential bluff because like you've got more equity than you think. It's all right to take those low equity, non-zero equity hands and use them as bluffs.
It's so fun too when you low equity bluff and get there and you're so disguised and like you hit that gut shot straight draw and they just never ever see it coming.
I was playing with my father-in-law and I hit one of those like backdoor, like just called. Yeah, I know. Yeah, I did. I had to do
the
it.
father-in-law.
Oh yeah,
I don't know if I would recommend that on this podcast. I think that's not good advice.
He was just like, I can't believe you had that hand, and I'm just there like, woohoo.
Yeah, brother-in-law. Yeah, brother-in-law. I don't know.
Wow.
He got me back. He got me back though later on. He bluffed me in a hand that I very well should have called in. So he did get me
Next
back.
week on the Strategy Pod, we're going to talk about Life EV and how it plays into poker strategy. Really good discussion there. The last area I want to talk about, and I think the most important, we've alluded to this a little bit throughout this pod so far, but I want to talk about the right type of opponents. And I don't know that the right type of opponents is necessarily as obvious as some people think it would be. Because I think sometimes people just assume like, oh, the bigger move you make, the worse you want the player to be. But to Chris's point earlier in the pod, if you have somebody that's calling down with fifth pair, it's really hard to bluff a player like that. So I want to hear from you guys about what player types and maybe what characteristics specifically of those player types you're targeting when you decide to run a bluff or not run a bluff. And we'll start with Ben on this one. We'll throw the GG Pro up there.
Yeah. I'm thinking more live, and just because I've been thinking about some of the live stuff because I was playing a little bit of live there a few months ago, and there was one old guy that I really tortured in this one bluff. Got it through, but in my head, I was like, that was not a good bluff whatsoever. Like, I can't believe I got him to fold. But then there was another guy that I tried to bluff, and it didn't work out. He ended up calling me down. So and he was a lot better player, like much more composed. So I think composure is a lot to do with it. Like, and a little bit younger too. Like, I hate to throw age stereotypes in there because sometimes you can sneak up on these players that are really, really skilled that, have an image, but. Yeah, I don't know. I think just knowing your opponent and having a feel for the table too, and even online, just having a feel for the dynamics at the table, I think is really important because then it allows you to pick out certain players that either it's going to work or it's not going to work.
Okay.
If that makes
what
any
about
sense.
You, Chris?
I kind of rambled there a little bit.
Yeah.
So.
No, it does.
I think of two different types of players. There's when you have maybe good players and maybe less experienced players. And I think when I think of I think both of those player types have types that I would bluff against and types that I would be a little less confident bluffing against. When I'm up against a good player, I really like to think about this more situationally and more about ranges and what kind of story am I telling. And I want it to be really a compelling lockstep narrative. Like, this makes sense because they're going to be a really good hand reader. And I want to be able to tell that story. When it's a less experienced player, I don't want to be up against somebody who's incredibly tight. Maybe that goes both ways, right? Because they're going to be more likely to fold. But if they have an incredibly tight opening range, I don't really like trying to bluff into somebody who's probably got a really strong holding. And what I really like bluffing against, my favorite type of player to bluff against, is somebody who doesn't have a plan, who is thinking one street at a time. And if I can think multi-street, and I can think about what kinds of cards are coming on like a turn or a river, which are going to really ruin this person's day, that's where I can have a plan where they had none. That's my favorite spot to bluff in.
So I want to interrupt you, Chris, because I love this point. But maybe talk a little bit about how you identify that a player is kind of just thinking street by street versus having a plan, because I don't know that the average person might, know how to catch that. So how do you find those people?
I think you can really tell a lot by how players react. This is much easier live. Online, I don't really know how you would do this very well. I mean, you can look at your HUD and you can look at data and really try to parse this out. But live, I think players, they give so much away about like how much stress there, and you can just watch them even in a hand you're not in, right? But you can tell that when the third heart came, they had no idea what to do, right? And they took a while and they hemmed and they hawed and it's like, and if there's a player who I see doing that, and maybe I get to see showdown, maybe I don't, but if I get to see them sort of like put themselves in the pressure cooker a lot, and where they like when the board changes, they don't know what to do, that's a really good sign of a player who's a good candidate to bluff, in my opinion.
I like that a lot. Taylor, your thoughts?
Yeah, it can change a decent amount depending on like what I'm trying to do. Because I think the most common answer in terms of like who do you want to bluff is kind of the old guy, the recreational player, the middle-aged guy that plays generally face up. And it's like, yeah, you're probably a good person to bluff, but in the right spots. Like a great one to try and like bluff in a small pot and take small pots off of. I think that fits the requirement there. But you talk about someone who is playing like that, but then you bluff one street and then you're like, okay, well, should I bluff the next street or should I do a triple barrel bluff? Like they're the type of people that are like, I called once, I'm going to keep calling and I'm going to call a third time. And like, you should be aware of that and be ready to like put the foot on the brakes and stop trying to bluff this person. Cause that is also a very common stereotype that like once they called once, they're committed to the hand and they're going to call this down and hope that their top pair is good or their pocket pair that they had that was under the top pair, they just didn't think you had a king or, whatever it was. So you have to be cautious of like those types of players because some are going to be great to bluff in small pots and some are going to be great to bluff in big pots. Because I think like the professionals or the really good players are actually the ones that I would target to bluff in a huge pot because they're going to be more thoughtful of, hey, I've got a skill edge. I think I can, bag this relatively confidently or make a deep run because I have this field dominated at my skill level. It's like, that's probably a good person to run a big bluff against because they're going to be a little bit more cautious around busting for their tournament life when they felt like they had an edge on everyone else. So it's like, you'd think you wouldn't want to bluff the professionals, but I think those are the spots where you would want to bluff the professionals is when you get in the big pots. So I think it can work both ways because I also wouldn't really want to bluff a professional in a small pot because they're going to know what they should be check calling with much more than a average Joe middle-aged recreational player. So it really depends on what situation are you in and who are you up against.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I think that for me, the player type that I see people bluff into that I think is the worst are the egomaniacs. Like, never bluff an egomaniac. Like, those are the guys that when you have the nuts, you want to go 3x pot because they just feel like you're pushing them around and they want to make the call. Same with your friends. I never, ever, ever try to bluff my friends because they want to get you. They want to be like I can't tell you how much money I've made, even like in Vegas, where like I've had a buddy end up at the table and I river the nuts and I just absolutely pile, knowing that they're just like, what are you doing? You're going 4x pot here. Like you're not doing this to me. And they call and you show the nut flush and they're like, how do you just bet 4x pot there? It's like, well, because I just know like this is an ego spot. So I think and like I literally pay attention to this. Like when I'm at the table, I'm listening to conversations to see like, is anybody at the table cocky? Are they full of themselves? Are they bullying other people with their speech? You know, those kind of people that just want to push people around. They don't want to be pushed around. I definitely try to avoid those. The player type that I love to attack the most are the superstitious and biased people. Because these are people who think that they it's funny, like they'll see, and you'll even hear it sometimes where they'll be like, they'll get in a spot and like the heart will hit and they'll be like, I know you hit your flush. And then they'll sit there and scoff and shake their head and, you know, just get all frustrated. And like they've already folded, but they're going to sit there for a minute and a half and tank and just lament the fact that it's so ridiculous that so-and-so hit their flush. I see that from a player and I'm like, yeah, I like every scare card on the planet, big pot, small pot, like I'm going to run this person to the ground until they decide to be optimist or I have their entire stack, because they're literally, they just can't help themselves. They read between the lines and they fill in the blanks in ways that are really beneficial to us. So I think there's a lot to the psychology and the personality of people that I think can help you decipher. Like if you listen to all three of these guys talk about, you know, there's some good players that are good to target, some good players that are bad, some situations that are good for good players, some situations that are bad. Getting some of the psychology and the way people think can really help you kind of whittle down whether they're going to do that. And the last thing I'll say with that too is your image really matters, right? So when we talk about good players, like how do those good players perceive you? If you're kind of an unknown, especially if you're a little bit older and you don't look like a young player, like you might even be a really talented player, but you might be perceived as just, you know, an old man coffee or a straight up player that doesn't bluff much. You can really use that to your advantage. Whereas like if you are well known or it's somebody that's, you know, you've played with online or they recognize you from streaming or something, then their take on you might be very different. So you have to kind of have some awareness about how people are treating you, how they're thinking about you, how they're talking about you. Do they talk like they respect your play? Do they talk like they think you know what you're doing? You know, do they talk like you're aggressive? Do they talk like you're passive? And kind of factor those into your decisions well, because I've definitely seen some friends of mine who are really talented players, but don't get the credit for being talented players. And I know we all want credit in poker. You really don't, because you can get away with so much. People think you're just a vanilla player and you just fly under the radar so much better. So I think that is really important. All
Along
of that
those, one of your earlier points, and also to chime in with what Chris said before, pay attention to your opponents. Like you said, you're looking for the superstitious people, the ones that are, you know, worried. You're going to get that information by watching hands that you're not in. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't always have to be in spots where they folded and you know, don't see what their cards were, but you can see it in other spots too. Like, you know, they bet flop and turn. It was a very dry, boring run out, but they checked back river with top pair, top kicker when their opponent, you know, never took an action against them. Cause they're like, well, you know, I've been beat by two pair, like in the past, let me just check here and, you know, take my ace king and hopefully win this hand. That's a really good observation to make for a player, that they are potentially worried about things that might not be there. Mm-hmm. Like if your opponent never raised you and you've just been getting value bets out and you've got a very clean river in your top pair, top kicker, like go for another street. Why not? Like what do you have to worry about? But if they're not taking that, that means they're cautious and they're worried about other things that might be out there. So noticing that someone might be thinking like that makes them a great candidate to potentially bluff and take check raises on and essentially tell them those things that they're scared of already. So it's easy to find those spots. You just have to pay attention to what your opponents are doing in hands that you're not involved in, and see how they're behaving and how they're reacting to their holdings versus how they probably should be.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I think that one of the most powerful things that I get information on live is when something really unusual happens and my opponent's completely oblivious to it. Like they just and my favorite is like a situation like it'll be like a 3-bet pot and I'll just put like a 10% C bet in and they don't like there's just no like wait you're only betting 10. They don't even flinch and they just kind of look at their cards and then they just casually call. And like to Chris's point about like street for street, it's not quite the same thing, but that's kind of where I start to go down that line of like, okay, this player's just literally thinking on that first level of what is my hand and is it good or not,
Right.
And that really funnels me down a world where like I have a lot of options. Whereas if I go 10% and the person goes and gives me a fun look, I'm like, okay, now I know that like one, they're cognizant that this is not. I mean, it actually is a thing, but it's not something they're used to. And two, like now I know that they're actually reacting to that, which means that their thought process is going to incorporate that information into what they do. Really, really, really good stuff here. Do any of you have any other thoughts? Any other practical tips?
I have a question for this group.
Yes.
So you mentioned Rob, and I really agree with you, and I think I've maybe taken this to heart too much, and that's my question for the group. That flush draws, let's say we flop a flush draw, we bet flop, we bet turn, we get to the river, it busts out, and so we're sitting there with really a bad hand that sometimes would ask us to bluff, but a bad hand to do it with because we block our opponent, who what we want them to have are those flush draws. But are there any good triple barrel river spots when we have a busted flush draw? Like, is there a spot where we would want to bluff with that? Because I think I've taken it so much to heart that I just don't, and I think that might be I might be going too far the other way, and I'm just curious what your take is on that.
I'll let you two go first.
I think there definitely is, but I think you have to think about it like in the sense of like what could your range be, and then how did those turn and river cards like play out? Like say it was, Jack 7-4, 2 hearts, one of something else. Turn was a small inconsequential card, call it a 5 or maybe a 3 or something. But then the river's an ace. Like then there's a lot of things that we have that can still connect with the ace. But we had, king, queen of hearts or queen, 10 of hearts or something like that. Like I think there has to be something else that like helps our narrative, because if it comes out with low cards and stuff that doesn't really change the board, and then you take the flush draw bet, that feels like it's going to work out much less often than when there is something else that can potentially be going on that gets our opponent to fold.
Yeah, I mean, we got to tell a good story. And so I think I'm on the same page as Taylor, unfortunately, again.
That's always the right page.
Yeah, it seems like it keeps coming up every here in this episode. But yeah, no, I think I like that. I don't think there's any more I can really add there. It's perfect.
Yeah, I'm gonna go back to the backdoor flush draw and straight draw thing. I think that those are situations that are really good. The runner paired board cards is good. I also think, and we talked about this a little bit on our earlier strategy pod, but maybe some of you didn't listen to that one. I think the turn is so important. I think if you want to turn busted flush draws into a bluff, you really need to keep your opponent's range uncondensed on turns and avoid the temptation to go the theory route where we just pile on turns. And now when our opponent calls turn, their range is really condensed to strong pairs. And what's really changed, right? Like it takes a really dramatic river card at that point to change in a way. Like it's not enough like the board to pair. Like let's say say the flop is Jack 7-4 to Taylor's point, and the turn's a king and the river is a 7, right? They're never folding their king on the turn, right? They're just not. Like, they're not going to give you credit for that at that point when you've gone really huge on turn. So I think you have to do something to where, like, you're keeping in those fifth pairs, you're keeping in those ace highs, you're keeping in some of their really bad draws. Like, you really don't want them folding their gut shots. You almost want to give them not a good price, but like a perceived good price on their gut shots, so that like you can get some of those hands to fold. And so I think we have to really deviate, especially in spots where our opponents aren't going to raise us a lot on turns. So I think that's really important. And then once you've done that, to Taylor and Ben's point, I think when you get rivers that can tell a story, it's a lot easier to get them to fold the bottom part of their range. And because the pot's smaller, you're risking less, right? Like, going pot in a 60 big blind pot is a lot harder than going pot in a 35 big blind pot. I'm curious. I'll throw a question back at you guys. One thing I've experimented with a little bit with some success, but I don't know if I have the sample size to say it's a thing, is, do you ever try to, against good players, instead of going for the pot or over pot bluff and super polarizing, go that like 2/3 value, where they're just like, oh, this is just always value, and they may overfold because the sizing doesn't look polarized?
Yeah, I've only done it like very, very rare situations where I'm like, I'm certain that it's gonna work, like against somebody who's probably a better player. That's gonna be like, okay, there's no way this can be a bluff, and not against like a recreational player who might just be, that's nothing I call, right? But I think it would have to be more versus a thinking player that's gonna be like, no, they're just trying to get thin value. There's no bluffs here. I actually did it in the biggest buy-in I ever played online, which was a 1K. I did it in a pot, and I still remember it was so much fun. I just got it through, and I was like, it worked. Look, third pot bluff. Like, anyway, so that's my one little fun story I had about that. But yeah, it does work, but I think we have to pick our opponents very, very carefully.
I go small for bluffs all the time. Because
Even against good players?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I think it works more against bad players, just because they're more binary in their decisions of like, I'm going to call or I'm going to fold in this spot.
Right.
And it works a lot when they act like that, because then you can just kind of like, yeah, I bet, and then they fold, and it was low risk, and I can take it down. But I think it can work against good players too, just in spots where it's just like, why would you go half pot here? And you have to like know what you're targeting to get to fold when you do that too. Like, if you're going to take a middle pair and run that small bluff, well, now you're just essentially value cutting yourself. Like, that's just a really bad decision. But if you're in a spot where you're like, hey, I've got queen high, and I think king high and ace high is going to fold if I put out a small bet here still, that's great. Yeah, no, that's awesome. Like, then put out that small bet and like target the king highs, target the ace highs. And when they call you a third pair, go, yeah, I guess I could have gone bigger and maybe got them to fold third pair, but that wasn't what I was trying to get to fold with this bet. So yeah, I'm all for betting small for bluffs.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking specifically on rivers, like going for that like third pot once we get to the river. I don't know if that makes a difference or not, but because I think
it's all about what you're targeting to fold.
Exactly. Even on flops, it'd be the same thing on flops, right? Like having a target is really good.
Yeah.
Chris, any thoughts on that?
I mean, it depends what we mean by kind of small and big in this spot. If we're talking about rivers and that kind of thing, I have done small river bets. And speaking of bluffing with flush draws, occasionally I will, if like, let's say I have 4 or 5 of spades, right? And it's a 2 spades board, and I've been calling down from the big blind. I will occasionally on a river lead out really small to target basically the better flush draws that also missed, but definitely beat my 4 or 5 of spades. That's a kind of like spot where I kind of like a little small bluff, little blocking bet kind of bluff, but I like that more out of position. In position, I don't love it. I don't love opening the action in a spot. I don't know. I just, maybe it's a leak in my game or something, maybe, but I like a bigger bet in that.
No,
kind of spot.
that's very true. In position versus out of position, I think definitely plays into this.
Yeah.
When I'm thinking of a small bet for a bluff, it's almost always when I'm out of position. But very good of you to call that out and bring out that point, Chris.
Yeah, that's a good point. Any final tips, tricks? Any last points from the panel here?
I have one that I was kind of thinking about. We were talking about live, and I'm still kind of coming up through the scene and figuring out my game and stuff. And I just want to shout out kind of the people who may not have as much experience, but when you sit down and you play live, especially if it's your first time, I mean, I was just excited to be there. I'll be honest. I was pumped. I was like, I just want to play some pots. Hopefully I win. Who knows what's going to happen, right? We're talking tournaments. But I think especially when you're new starting out, really, have that moment, but then bring it back in and look at who's at the table. Look at the bias, people who have biases maybe against you or things that you're hearing at the table. Pay attention to that, and you'll get enjoyment out of it. Like you'll hear things at the poker table that you won't hear anywhere else, and that's part of the fun of the game, really. And you won't even have to look at your phone anymore. At least I don't have to anyway. So, but like I say, I think that was a hard thing for me when I first started because I was just so excited and just amped that I was just like not paying attention, just putting chips in the pot, and everything else was just I was just there to have a good time. But once I actually figured out, okay, pay attention to this and pay attention to what they're talking about because this might come up later, I started actually having some success, which was even more fun.
I like that a lot. I think that one of the best edges in live is just the amount of information we get, right? That you just can't ever get from a HUD, no matter how hard you try. So I like to. I saw somebody tweet this, and I felt so excited when I saw it because I'm like, I'm not as weird as I thought I was. There's at least one other person as weird as me. I love to commentate my live tables, like just pretend I'm on a live broadcast and just commentate it out because it just keeps me in the flow of what's going on, and it also kind of gives it a little bit of a fun vibe, like I'm on a TV broadcast or something, right? It's a little cheesy, but I encourage you to try it, especially if you're one of those, what do they call it? Like the people that have the internal voices or whatever, like if you've got that narrative voice or whatever they call it. Because it really can. Like
that's why I stream, because I just talk to myself all the time. So that's what my wife said. It's like if you didn't stream, you would just be sitting in there talking to yourself anyway. So you may as well just stream yourself play.
Yeah. I mean, I would encourage you to do this in your head and not out loud at the live tables, but yeah, I mean that's essentially what it is, and that just allows you to notice so many things and piece together hand to hand and having a full picture, not just being in the moment. Cool. Well, thank you everybody for being a part of this again. A huge shout out to Running Aces, the official sponsor for Rec Poker. Again, check them out at runningaces.com. Maybe save a little vacation time for January so you can come up and visit Chris and Taylor and Dan and the crew. And I'm sure Jim will probably be there for another epic Rec Poker weekend. And be sure to come back in 2 weeks. Kim Kilroy will be joining us in 2 weeks. We'll be talking about turning the corner in poker and some of the stories from our past that have helped us take huge leaps in our game and get to the next level. I think you'll find it both inspirational and informative as you might be able to find some of those key moments that you can apply to your game as well. On behalf of the great Jim Reed, who's driving through a blizzard to get back, and will be back with us here soon on the Rec Poker Podcast, for Chris, for Taylor, for Ben, thank you, everybody, for being a part of this night, and we will see you soon.